All right, we are almost to the top of this hour, and I am very excited about this presentation, which kind of makes me feel a little bit like a nerd for a second, but I don't care because we've been talking about BIBFRAME for so long, and to see what feels like to me real substantive work in the direction towards implementation. It's more tilling of the ground, but this feels substantive to me. And maybe I am a nerd, I'm not sure. So I'm very excited to be moderating this. I want to say welcome to our presenters, Galen Charlton, who is the Implementation IT Manager for Equinox, BJ Colvin, Director of Information Technology Services for King County Library System, and Jennifer Weston, who is the Project and Education Manager for Equinox Open Library Initiative. And I want to say thank you to our champion level sponsors who have sponsored the 2025 conference. Those being the Evergreen Collaborative Development Initiative, I don't need to say the Midwest Tape, Equinox Open Library Initiative, Stat Courier, and Unique. We could not have this conference without our sponsor. So thank you again to them. I am going to hand this off to Galen. Let me quit my little screen share so yours gets bigger, and I'm going to mute myself, but I will watch chat for questions unless somebody is actively watching this among this group. I mean, I'm going to watch anyway, so.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ruth. What we're going to discuss is the results of a research project that Equinox did with the King County Library System in conjunction with funding from the KCOS Foundation. And we'll be discussing, why there is a need for public library voice in BIBFRAME, talking through how we constructed the research project, going through our findings, discussing what it would look like to implement BIBFRAME for a public library, and discuss some resources that we're working on. So I think it's important to emphasize that this is very much exploratory. Sadly, we can't announce that here's this shiny new BIBFRAME implementation that solves all of our public library metadata problems. Instead, what we were hoping to do is to take a look at BIBFRAME and linked data technologies in general in the public library context, work with experienced IT and metadata staff at King County to evaluate some of the existing BIBFRAME tools, and take our findings, to help guide future involvement by public libraries in BIBFRAME, and to, in the long run, make it concrete by changes to software or possibly creating a new software. So, BIBFRAME, of course, has been the topic of discussion for a good long time. But as Jennifer will get into, public library participation has largely been lacking. So with this, I'll go ahead to the next slide, and turn it over to BJ to talk a bit about what the project was meant to accomplish from King County's point of view.
Awesome, thank you, Galen. Yeah, so I just want to kind of just briefly, I know we're going to talk through a lot more, but what we were really hoping, this came about, probably about a year and a half ago this time, right, Galen, if I remember correctly from the initial thing. Equinox was talking about working on a larger grant, and we have the Caseless Foundation, which I want to say thank you again, provide the funding. We really liked kind of where they were going for them, and we were also saying, like, let's get this kicked off and let's get some bigger data. We're happy to have some of our staff participate and really inform, the bigger conversations. So what was really key to us, and I think what the foundation really found it appealing to help fund this project, was really that ensuring the libraries had a voice in BibFrame, the public library specifically, because it allowed us to have this focus on, the patron impact. KCLS, when we're looking at a project, that's the number one thing we're looking at. And we were really worrying at this point that BibFrame, the public libraries, had been left out of some of those conversations. And therefore, like some of the patron impact and some of the opportunities that would present to patron, we'll talk about more later, weren't being heard. And so we were really excited, went to the foundation, we were able to get it. And one of the other focuses we had is also for implementations. How do we make sure that this is staff friendly for the future? Planning not just for like a, implementation we were forced to, but let's plan out for the long term. How do we transition staff? I've been in technology my entire career. I've seen lots of transitions where that's not thought through. And we wanted to make sure that the people on the ground that were going to be living this day in and day out really had some voices heard. And so it was excitement to the staff. And it also started building out, we could evaluate what is the comfort with BibFrame, what are areas that we needed in KCLS to start thinking about on the long-term goals for this. And so that was kind of the basis for the partnership and how this grant came together. And I'll pass it back over. That's unless there's questions about that.
Okay, thank you, BJ. So then, the next theme is discussing the need for the public library voice in BibFrame, and I will hand it over to Jennifer to give us all a history lesson.
Thanks, Galen. If we go to the next slide, because we can't really talk about public library engagement without really looking at the history of BibFrame. So I've got a couple of slides that I promised to go very quickly about the history of BibFrame. So it won't be a documentary about this, but it's worth stating that BibFrame began in 2011, which is now going on 14 years ago. BibFrame, of course, Bibliographic Framework Initiative. It's just shortening of that term there. It's developed in partnership, we know, by the Library of Congress. They were working with Eric Miller of Zafira at the time. Zafira is just a consulting firm specialized in the deployment of semantic web technologies, but that's since been purchased by EBSCO, but that's another story. But as we have long now been talking about BibFrame as the replacement for MARC. If you don't know anything else about BibFrame, you know that that's the context that so many libraries are talking about that now. And we've been really responding to that refrain since Roy Tennant did his MARC Must Die Library Journal article in 2002. That's now been 23 years ago. So this is not a new concept, but it is new in as much as there's actually data to look at now. So BibFrame was designed as a or envisioned as a communication format and bibliographic description content standard, but to be model agnostic, which is kind of where we started here. What model can we use for public libraries to actually interact with this data? And we found out there was just a lot more to learn about the structure of the data. Lastly, before we move on here, this idea of a communication format is really evolved the bibliographic design standards as a linked data model. And this is what was very exciting to us. Linked data meaning bibliographic information stored outside the library community can be used both in this whole new bibliography environment that's not just housed behind our walls, but the network is central and interconnectedness is commonplace, as you see there in that quote at the bottom. So this was exciting to us to see where we go. So next slide, please. So in 2011, we had BibFrame 1.0. A model came out. It was hypothetical at this point, theoretical at this point, had 4 classes. Really a lot of growing pains there about, how do we get what is in MARC and not lose anything? And so you kind of just see some kind of nerdy techie things there about how we started to look at mapping. The library community, started looking at mapping MARC to BibFrame. So we started 1.0 in 2011. So next slide. I will say is in 2011, and we can go on to the next one. But in 2011 is when we started to hear this idea of triples. And so today is not that presentation. There will be one, but we talk about the, looking at how you connect things. So I'll just kind of leave that there with the whole predicate object, subject predicate object. That's what a triple is. So if you were expecting to hear that today, I just said the word triple, and now I can move on. But in 2014, there was a review of what was going on with this new technology and started using libraries. And I'm going to purposely say these names so when I get to the how much are public libraries involved, you'll see why I'm doing this. Cornell got a grant from the Mellon Foundation to start their linked Data for Libraries project. You had Cornell, Harvard, and Stanford. They recognized when they started doing any kind of test at scale that that original technology or original structure was just not going to work. So they identified shortcomings, led to a review. 2016, we get BIBFRAME 2.0. Now we start seeing things like we actually have the identification of the concept of an item, which did not exist prior to 2016. You just had works. So as you can see, there was a long way to go. But from here, we get a brand new partnership in 2016, extending library data. The LD4L now becomes LD4P, and you get Columbia, Cornell, Harvard, Library of Congress, Princeton, and Stanford 2016. Next slide. So then we get to BIBFRAME 2.0. Get my notes over here. So as of now, that's really where we are. I've got links to what this model looks like, the ontology that's there. This is what we started with in our investigation. We started looking at this relationship model and how it's going to be used, how it is being used by the Library of Congress. Interestingly, from the time we started this project until we had our on-site discussions, Library of Congress actually started cataloging with BibFrame. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it was only in the last few months, 6 months, that they actually had catalogers that were using this BibFrame model on any regular basis. So I've just got some notes there about some controlled language. Our question leading out of this, are we still emphasizing what that linked data model is? Because underneath all of it, linked data is just supposed to be used barriers without access. And it seemed like very much that that was not the environment we were in. So in my last slide, if you'll go into that one, Galen, if we look at, oh, here's the model. I just had to throw that in because I'm not going to say anything about the model. If you want to know more about the model, this is the current model of BibFrame. Now we can go to the next slide. So public library representation is where I think the spark of this idea joined, because there's not any noticeable public library participation, certainly not in these early funded cohorts for any kind of testing. Certainly not when you go to the BibFrame workshop in Europe. You hear even the international view, you're not seeing public libraries that are included. We are finding that even when we reached out to ask to various different vendors about what they're doing with linked data and BibFrame, right now your vendors can offer you services, which they will call BibFrame, but they're just converting data from MARC into a different format and then moving it back into MARC to be able to display it. So that's where we are. Also very much why this project is needed to start involving public libraries in this discussion. They have been excluded to date. And I think that's back to you.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Jennifer. So what I'm going to do next is talk a bit about the mechanics and structure of the research project. So once the grant had been secured, we began in earnest in September 2024 with an orientation session to cover the basics of the BibFrame history and provide an overview of the vocabulary. And then our next step was to survey IT and metadata staff at cataloging at KSOS to gain an understanding of both the starting point for the staff with respect to linked data, as well as the hopes and expectations. We then moved on to deploying some of the existing BibFrame editor tools and conducted an evaluation with follow-up focus groups in December and February. In April, Jennifer and I went over to King County for an on-site visit of about a day and a half to discuss our findings and engage in a further discussion and brainstorming. And we are now in the phase of putting the final report together and preparing to disseminate it and share resources about it. And I think dissemination will be an ongoing thing for us since this project represents a start of a discussion, not an endpoint. So What we'll do next is turn it over to BJ to talk a bit about how the engagement looked like from a King County's point of view.
Thank you, Galen. So yeah, the big idea is we really wanted to get voices from like various groups. We had, CMS for leadership involved. I was involved throughout the project. We also had my business applications manager, Lauren Yachman, and many of her team on the business application teams. I won't list everyone that's envisioned, but also like the catalog and librarians directly involved. The idea really is we wanted some diverse perspectives. We also did some outreach both within the project and outside of the project with some of our community library staff that maybe not wasn't involved directly in those, the sessions, but really understanding like what was the critical things so we had an idea of what the patron impact any of these changes were going to be. From that, Galen's talked about some of that, but we wanted to make sure there's different ways that people interact. So we had a survey, focus group, and learning sessions. That interactivity was really critical. And I think when I talked to some of the staff afterwards, that feedback was being able to really get hands-on with the tool was some of the most impactful for kind of really knowing where it was. If I go to the next slide. The other portions that we were thinking about is, often when you're exploring a new tech like this, there is a big disruption. So the idea is we are far enough ahead of the curve that we weren't looking at replacing the workflow and then learning, on things, picking a specific tool. Staff really enjoyed that they got a little takeaway from their workday to really dig through some of the workflows without impacting their current day-to-day risk. And I think that really reduced the risk and the anxiety around it, knowing that we really emphasized every point of the step is, hey, we're not looking at doing anything with BIBFRAME on the short term. We're just really wanting to inform. So we're really transparent with staff. And it really, I think, reduced the risk and also got some really deeper exploration from it. And staff also really got excited that they got a voice in the larger things potentially, knowing that not everything they said is going to be shared, but that this report, our plan is to, publicly release it, advocate for it. And so it created that excitement. And that's really where we felt that we got some of the best learning opportunities out there because there was excitement and there wasn't fear. And so everything throughout this step was reducing fear and anxiety throughout it. I know I had one-on-ones with a couple of the staff that had started to express like, hey, are we actually looking at this right now? And it's a learning project. And so I felt that really meant that the end results, as I was listening into that on-site session, really everybody was open and enjoying their time together. The final 2 days were, 2 days on-site, brought in donuts and pizza, really just to make it that just as relaxed as possible. So, and I think people start really recognizing that impact we potentially had on this research project. And that's really, unless Galen, Jennifer, anything you think else you want me to touch base on that, I'm happy to hand it back over.
Thank you, BJ. So during what we ended up doing is identifying 3 tools to use as a showcase and to have the library staff evaluate. So one tool was Marva, specifically Marva Quartz, which is the BIBFRAME editor that the Library of Congress is using, and as Jennifer mentioned, actually using in production by a few members of their cataloging staff. The link, by the way, should be considered transitory. It's something set up that was set up for the project that won't last forever. But if you do want to take a peek at it, it's there. Another tool we evaluated was Sinopia, which is part of the output of the linked data for production project. And is being used in production by several of that collaborative's members. Sinopia, by the way, is out there. They have both a production and a staging environment, and they will happily give out accounts, particularly to the staging environment, to anybody who asks. So this is definitely something that you can if you're inclined, play around with right now. I should note, by the way, that one of the things on the IT side we were looking at is how easy or is it even possible to install these tools. Both Marva and Zenobia are open source software, but in practice, both of them are open source software, mostly in the sense that the code is out there, not that either of them are particularly designed yet for others to host on their own. So it's doable with Marva. Zenobia at the moment is challenging for others to install. And we also took a look at MARC Edit by Terry Reese, which in recent years has grown some BIBFRAME utilities. So I'm going to move on to showing a couple screenshots of Marva and Zenobia. So this, of course, is in one sense a terrible graphic in terms of how much is being shown on screen. I promise that Marva was not funded by the makers of 40-inch monitors, but the point here is that what you're seeing in Marva is an interface. The left two columns are concerning forms for entering work and instance. The third column is an on-the-fly BIBFRAME, RDF XML serialization, and then a MARC and MARC XML serialization. So one thing that Marva is good at is showing the translation of between the various metadata formats on the fly. And to, by the way, acknowledge the discussion in chat. Yeah, MARC Edit is not open source. And while we would have preferred to have worked with an open source MARC editor in the context of this project, well, that's not MARC Edit, but MARC Edit is, of course, one of the tools that is heavily used by catalogers. And then the other thing, screenshot we have is of a Zenobia, different point of view. One of the nice things about Zenobia is the way that it facilitates lookup of various linkable attributes, including subject headings. But if you're looking at these screenshots and thinking to yourself, okay, how tall or how long are these forms? Keep that in mind because we will be going back to user experience and UX concerns in a moment. So what we'll be doing now is moving back to Jennifer to discuss some of what we found throughout the various phases of the project.
Okay. And as we go to the next slide, I'll introduce, now we are looking at the preliminary work that we did and then moving into the work that we did on the on-site workshop that we had there. I'll skip most of this. We've already talked about the survey that we did and what we anticipate to get out of that survey. It was more baseline, just an understanding of where everybody was coming from and any expectations they might have had about BIBFRAME or about the project. Then had the orientation sessions, the goals, and the evaluation period with the editors. We did spend quite a bit of time and a focus group as a remote session comparing the editors to say which one do I like best. I like this, I don't like that. We have lots of notes about what we like and what we don't like about the editors that will be included in our final report. And go on to the next slide. So now we're on site and we reviewed all of our feedback and from the focus group sessions and about the editors, but we wanted to move on from the editors as we got together. When we say joint discussion, that means the ITS group, CMS group, and Galen and I were there. We focused on the future, a couple of different themes. The first one being future usability and public library needs. One of the things we'd hoped to be able to do was look at the editors and see how usable are these. Again, probably premature at this point because the editors, as you'll see as I continue my talk here, are probably not quite ready for prime time in public libraries, but we did talk about what a library would need to be able to implement something using linked data in BibFrame. And then we had a lot of different just discussion prompts about discovery and end user, because as BJ said, at the end of the day, this really is how does it improve the experience of the patrons using our libraries and our materials. And then we went to our breakout sessions. So I'm going to continue talking about cataloger input on the next slide. I remember to advance my own slides here. So what we had here, and again, we'll have, did I go too far? Overall themes. Now, I'll talk about overall themes first and then catalogers. So what we found is that we really had many more questions than answers, which was important. We expected this. It was very much part of what this project was intended to be. What do we not know? What has simply not been addressed at all yet in the BibFrame design? That was important because public libraries have a very specific point of view that in many cases is not being, their questions just aren't being answered. So we've got this long list of things that we still would need to answer before we implemented any kind of platform to accommodate BibFrame. Again, we talked about the comparison of the two editors, but what we found is we really don't have enough of a fully formed tool to spend a lot of time talking about tools. What we had is essentially just a single record editor. We could not do any kind of batch loading of records, and we really couldn't get too far into any kind of evaluation about what a good record should look like. And if you know a cataloger, you know how frustrating that is. If you don't know what a good record should look like, what are you evaluating in an editor? So then we continued on to the next slide. We tried to then narrow down on here some particular points about dependencies on being able to evaluate and how BibFrame might be used in the public libraries and what we could evaluate with what's available now. So what can we do beyond these editors? We realized our limitations, couldn't do any batch loading, there was no discovery or admin interface. It's just the editor review at this point. And the model itself, we couldn't even begin to get into multiple languages beyond English to really kick the tires on that. So we talked about the role of OCLC, who is implementing BibFrame into their records already. If you're an OCLC subscriber, you will have started to see all kinds of new fields on your records that are coming in, which led to a conversation about ownership of data. Who actually owns this linked data that's out there? Talked about authority maintenance, so who maintains it? What happens if you need a local vocabulary that's not represented in any of the existing data set that's being built now? We found conflicts with RDA, not a surprise, but we have now documented what those conflicts are. RDA will tell you the definition of one thing. The BibFrame model, in some cases, does not agree. And we talked quite a bit about this whole concept of lossiness. What are we losing? What might be left behind in a MARC to BibFrame conversion? Okay, next slide. And then we got our hands dirty, because once we found out that the Library of Congress was actually using a production BibFrame editor, we started looking at their records. We compared the Library of Congress to OCLC records. We started looking at these new fields. We looked up what these new fields are. We spent more time on standard bibliographic record definitions that we have personally in a long time. We found what those are. Here's the exciting part. It is saying this thing is related to that thing, and now there's a link that makes that happen. So they're new MARC fields. So we started looking at what is this thing and what does it actually define. In some cases, it says this thing is related to itself, and that's all the link says. But we did start looking at what those documentation around these new relationships and how they're represented, but it was still all visible in MARC, is what we're realizing. We did spend a lot of time, and all this will be documented, but what we were finding is it really doesn't do anything different than what we are doing now yet, and we were still limited to the physical book. We had a whole conversation about what is beyond the book. And that's it. You're on to the next until my time.
Okay, so parallel with the breakout session with the catalogers, I led a breakout session with IT staff from King County. And our focus there was on the mechanics of conversion from MARC to BibFrame. King County had provided a sample of records to work with. And we spent a fair amount of time making use of batch conversion tools provided by the Library of Congress to deal with the MARC to BIBFRAME conversion. And a couple findings from that. First, the LC tools are a solid foundation. They work best if you have kept up with authority control, because there can be a big difference between trying to represent a local heading versus a heading that is, for example, properly coded and recognized as an LCSH or MESH or LC Children's heading, because if the authority control is good, that makes it possible for the outcome of the conversion to actually directly link to the relevant subject headings in a way that would not be possible if you haven't kept up. So this does point to authority control being something that already of a benefit to Evergreen users, but is also something that is important for keeping up with the future. One Evergreen specific concern, Evergreen has a very localized view of the use of the subfield 0 in the BIP records, basically always referring to the local Evergreen Authority ID. So a necessary part of the process when dealing with Evergreen is mapping, when possible, from Evergreen's notion of a subfield 0 to the more standardized one nowadays of referring to URIs, of the relevant names or subjects. Another thing we found, is that the Apache Gina Fusiki project, which provides a linked data store and a Sparkle engine, is great as an open source prototyping platform. You can easily take the results of a MARC to BIBFRAME conversion, load it into Fuseki, and immediately start querying it. We had also touched on discovery. We'll go into this in a little more detail shortly. The following day, we got back together and went through a set of questions and guided discussions. This slide mostly exists to show that we took advantage of both high technology and low technology during this research project. And extra bonus points to anybody who can decipher my handwriting on some of these. So moving on to what some of our findings were. A key theme was the needs of training and onboarding are going to be important towards the success of any rollout. So this includes things like figuring out how copy catalogers should be trained, and also sorting through the level of at what level do you need to or not need to care about some of the underpinnings, like at what point do you need to talk about RDF when you're talking about BIBFRAME? And I don't think we have a full answer there. One of the interesting things about MARC is the way that it's not just a metadata exchange format, but the way that it touches, it's become a language for catalogers and IT people to talk to each other about library metadata. So some of our findings: one, there's a significant room for UX improvement and metadata management tools that would be needed for it to be practical for public libraries. The existing editors have very long enough forms, and it's in contrast to the conciseness of MARC. And there's a need for much better batch change tools and batch import tools. And we think that this tooling is needed in order for public libraries to be able to engage at all. Again, work by LC and OCLC does allow for some public library experimentation, but that hasn't been their focus. So there's both an opportunity for public libraries to engage, but also a trap of a temptation to not engage and just wait until the issue gets forced by LC or OCLC. Good question, Ruth. More about that in a moment. But I think the trap of, if we let the big entities completely drive the discussion, I think there's real potential or real risk for BIBFRAME to become kind of a walled garden in a way that is contrary to the point of linked data. And of course, as with so many things in public libraries, patron visible benefits will be key to any uptake of a change, particularly when as major as public libraries adopting BIBFRAME. And with that, we'll turn it over to BJ to talk about the findings from King County's point of view.
Yeah, so I had a chance to kind of reach out to many of the participants and ask, like, for this, what are the things you would want me to highlight through it? One of the key things is they really found it to be awesome to get a chance to dive into it. I think they kind of universally noted Marva and Sinopia, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, so apologies, to be the kind of the most interesting to look at. They did identify that there's some areas of growth, but really started to kind of open some of that perspective, and I think it really unleash some new ideas. Where there was a lot of excitement was around that enhancing the patron experience. One thing that was really noted was like our multilingual access. That's been a really big thing at KCLS, and just the ease of it. And I think I have in our patron impacts kind of a dig into that a little bit more, but also like connecting resources. Are there other resources that can be connected more easily? And I think that was one area that I really came up with. There's a lot of things that we can do already in MARC. But it becomes like easier and more natural to do in BIBFRAME that just increases some of this usability, which increases that kind of the patron impact by making this just a, how do we invest upfront and early to make this easy so that that work is addressed pretty aggressively. Two things that the team really identified is that really needed some more work. And I think, it was touched on a little bit, but that copy cataloging workflows and discoverability access points were two areas that I think there was a lot of some hesitation around still, that I think is something at least we now know that we can invest in. And I think that's the point of this research project, not to find that it was ready to go off the shelf. And, we also got some early insights into consideration from my, IT team. What are things that we need to be thinking about now to prepare for that technical transition long term? If we go to the next slide, some of the technical ones that, again, my team kind of highlighted was, grading some of those mapping strategies from MARC to BIBFRAME, getting prepared for that conversion, some definitions around work, instance, and hub, and hopefully some improvements from cataloging accuracy from that. And definitely a huge need, and probably underline this, improved documentation, and a streamlined editor. None of the editors they tested are ready for what anybody wanted to see, but we really gained some information on what we'd be looking for in the future. The testing did review, see some different things, and I know Galen's talked through some of these already, as well as Jennifer, so I won't dive into, every aspect of that. They're more in the weeds than I am for that, but this is really just what my team said. These are the important things to highlight. And then the adoption consideration, really investing in training. Community resource integration would be probably one of the bigger benefits to patrons that wanted to have some more time researched into. I know that was something we spent quite a bit of talking about in excitement. Jennifer and I had a conversation about that. And also really making sure that we simplify those workflows to make it easier for new catalogers that are coming into the field. I think that's something that was talked about. How do we make sure it's really easy to come into this from the beginning without years of training required to make some of the simpler changes? So reducing those barriers to entry was an exciting opportunity. So with that, I'll hand it back over.
And I will just continue from here very briefly. None of this will come as a surprise. Challenges and opportunities there, the tools, the access to the tools. One of the things two of the things I wanted to mention that I have not today is that we identified some duplicative efforts that would be required, which is part of that workflow. If you have to create a work and then you have to create an instance, why can't it be simplified? But that's part of the workflow. The other part is this whole effect of what's going on at the Library of Congress. If they back away from authority control, which is happening, what's going on with RDA challenges, the original RDA is going away, these kind of things that just could have a larger effect on public library access, even more so than it does now. I will say we ended our conversations on a very positive note about the opportunities, the kinds of things that linked data will bring to us. Essentially just says it just expands the role of being able to express a relationship. You no longer have to choose what is the uniform title. We don't have to rank one above the other. We can just use relationships to identify community resources in every kind of format we can imagine. So we were really kind of excited about that. I'll leave that there because we're running a little short on time and just pass it back.
Awesome. So this is going to be the one I'm most excited about, and around that impact and benefit to patrons. When we at K-Sales looked at would we invest more money in this, whether it's future research projects or into ongoing development, engaging in it. I think the idea really was, how does this benefit patrons? It was very easy for our team to definitely look at the high level how it make maybe their jobs easier or the improvements, but we really wanted to get to a point where we could also really define to that patron impact. And so we were able to come up with, I think, 4 key areas that we could really see, and whether that was caused from ease of the workflow or a direct, better technology approach to do it. Bank robbery, I will consider that. But I think the most important one was improved search and discoverability. That linked data, navigating between related works, streaming, access to print, digital, audio, creating a visible relationship between those different things. One thing that we actually did is, pulling up the catalog. If you looked at like The Hobbit, how many different versions of Hobbits, and do patrons care about that? So can we simplify things like that? With this? And I think the answer was yes, that this structure really did lend itself towards that. The other one was accessibility. One of the ideas that was shared, and I will admit I don't 100% understand this, so Jennifer, if I get this wrong, but being able to really link to the different thesaurus and improve that authority record language linkages, make it easier for non-English speakers. So can you really find things through in a more natural thing? Jennifer, did I get that kind of right? Because this is one that I don't 100% understand, so I want to make sure I'm not misspeaking.
Absolutely. We can step outside of the hierarchy and do things in languages that people use.
Awesome. So yeah, and that allows that request for different languages formats for patron convenience. If you have someone who speaks 2 languages, they can get a hold of whatever language they need. Go to the next one, please. The one that I got really excited for, and I know I've talked with our executive director Heidi Daniel about, as well as that integrated non-traditional resources. Can we make it easier to find different patron opportunities because we're able to link to different things? We also came up with like oral histories and digital art projects that maybe are challenging to catalog, and creating those links make those easier to find those things for patrons, right? Whether that's community projects, special collections, library hosted events, or maybe even partner resources. We have a large, focus here at KCLS around our, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. Connecting people with partnerships maybe to help is something that would be really improved through this, as well as that enhanced personalization, community engagement. Can we get more personalized data around that through ease while also protecting privacy? That was a good conversation that came up, I think, towards some of the end, as you're looking at some of these opportunities. And then that community driven tagging, is there social cataloging to, contribute to the metadata? I think, looking at the aspirational side. And the last slide I have is, what our overall goal is really, discoverability. I think that's the thing. I don't know if anybody else is an Imperium fan like I am, but if there's the ease of the cataloging, not that this can't be done in MARC right now, but the difficulty of it really is, if Yaros ever decides that she wants to do a book purely from Broccoli's perspective, having a patron be able to find that easily, I think, is really the overall goal. And really, I need to know what happened to Broccoli. So I'm waiting for the next book already, because you can't do that with a cute fuzzy animal. But that's the idea, right? How do we make it as easy as possible for patrons to find what they're looking for? Libraries right now are sometimes behind the ball, and this is a really great step through this research program. Really identified that that's a way we can really improve it. So I just wanted to kind of wrap up with that point before I hand it over to Galen to close us out, I believe.
Thank you, BJ. So, with respect to next steps, it's important to note this is about continuing the conversation, not necessarily announcing a BIBFRAME-based Evergreen tomorrow. But some things that we discovered. The existing discovery platforms, be it Viewfind or Aspen, are actually still a decent starting point, and they would give us the way to add some linked data improvements without having to create a linked data native discovery system from scratch. So MARC, in a sense, could continue to be a help make the transition to BIBFRAME. With respect to something that might be worth building, I think there's a lot of potential to consider doing a new enhanced open source metadata editor as basically something that speaks both MARC and linked data with equal facility, and potentially is a standalone thing that could help manage the metadata for any system, Evergreen included, but not just Evergreen. And I think it would also potentially help deal with long-term succession issues around the future of MARC Edit. There are some opportunities for Evergreen, and potentially sooner rather than later, with respect to taking advantage of some of the work that people have done with including LCLC and LC with respect to identifying works. And I think we could take some of that and consider sooner rather than later using that to help improve Evergreen's meta-record matching. And I think there's also a good opportunity for us to consider making the management of records be something that's done more explicitly and visibly in the Evergreen MARC editor. So this is, again, seed for discussion. With respect to how we'll be concretely disseminating the project, we'll be setting up a portal. BJ, Jennifer, and I will be talking about it at the AOA annual in Philly, and we'll also be resurrecting the Evergreen BIBFRAME working group. So with that, I'd like to thank the KCLS Foundation for funding this effort. Thank Jennifer as well as Equinox Executive Director Lisa Carducci for working on our end of the project, as well as Jason Boyer. And at the KCOS, BJ, Lauren Yockman, and many others for good engagement and good feedback in this project. So I think this takes us to the end of the presentation. And I think we're at time, but we can maybe slip in one question if you're quick about it.
So I'm going to look down here. I'm going to go ahead and read Scott's comment real quick and see. It says, the opportunity for the first public libraries to engage sounds interesting, but the unknown factors and or disruption factors seem like they could possibly prove too daunting for institutions that are all about services to patrons being paramount. In other words, while it might be a better mousetrap, as he pointed out, the conversion could prove problematic, but it would benefit patrons in the long run. Question being, might the solid and dedicated behind the scenes testing lessen those worries and concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. And in a particular, I think will depend on public libraries identifying some pioneers and ideally working in a collaboration to do pilot projects and to demonstrate that this works and will actually help public libraries. But I think the Evergreen community as a whole certainly offers an excellent seed group for such an effort.
And then this is a good question. I kind of know the answer, but I don't think I'll articulate it well. Bradley says, I'm curious about how much real momentum is on this at the Library of Congress these days. I wonder if any work is getting done. I know the short answer is yes, but I don't know if somebody else to expound on that a little bit.
That's a very good question. In one sense, we don't know. I will say that there was a bit of dark humor among the three of us preparing this presentation, of hoping that we didn't get preempted by an announcement that LC was abandoning BIBFRAME. But I think a key thing is, regardless of what happens at that level, and regardless of the specific virtues of the BIBFRAME or the specific problems with the BIBFRAME, we all collectively still need better tools to deal with the metadata at scale. And public libraries deserve a seat at the table to help build such tools.
Very much so. Thank you all for this presentation. As somebody who's going to be teaching new librarians about information representation and cataloging, this is very interesting to me, and I'm following everything that comes out. So thank you. These slides are going to be available. I know I'm referring back to them, as well as the presentation recording will be available very soon. So check back and keep your eyes peeled for the resurrection of the BIBFRAME working group and everything else that comes along with that. Thank you, Galen, BJ, and Jennifer.
Thank you, Ruth.